Good morning, everybody. I'll get Councillor O'Brien to kick us off with a karakia.
Morena tata, kia nui tata. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kine kutu, kia mā taratara ki tai. He hi ake ana te a tākura, he tio, he huka, he hau hu, ti hei, Māori ora.
Kia ora. Just some meeting notices first. Welcome councillor staff, presenters and members of the public, either present or online, and those watching at a later date. Council briefings are recorded. Public galleries attendees' presence implies your consent to be broadcast. Health and safety, in case of an emergency, follow the building wardens to the nearest exit. The meeting point is across the road at Peace Park. Bathroom facilities are located over in that direction, opposite the chamber foyer entrance. We have some apologies from Councillor Jukes. Councillors Rangiaho and Boynton will be attending online. I think Councillor Rangiaho will be coming just a tad late. The second section, the public excluded section, will be postponed until the 30th of July due to staff illnesses. So we're just dealing with the public section of this meeting today. Welcome, gentlemen. Bevan, Howard, Philip, is it? Howard's not here, no, yeah, all right. Well, welcome, gentlemen, and I believe we're in your hands.
Morena tātou. So we've got Philip Jones and Greg Robertson with me, not Robinson. So we've been doing some work on the Three Waters rating review thus far. Howard's travelling around the world at the moment, so can't be with us, but he does pipe up with a few emails every now and again, and they're usually very useful. So just want to confirm our topics for today. So this is the fourth workshop we've had on water rating review. The first one, and plus there was an additional one just to set the scene and get the ball rolling on this piece of work, which clearly outlined the problems and the challenges we have with the current funding models. So just want to be clear that the conversations we're having are around should we or do we make changes to the way that we're currently funding and rating for Three Waters. The next piece of work, which we haven't dived into, is how do we make those changes? And then a subsequent piece of work we'll need to do is when do we make those changes? So just be clear, it's do we? And there are some challenges that we need to work through as part of that. But the direction we'll be seeking today is just on the should we make those changes. So we want to confirm the direction of travel on water, stormwater, wastewater, water supply and stormwater at a high level. And so the principles for water supply: should all connected properties be metered? What is the preferred option for allocation of percentage of fixed versus variable costs? For stormwater, we want to understand whether commercial industrial properties outside of Whakatane should have the 2.2 differential applied, same as Whakatane or Hopi. What is the preferred option for allocation of that percentage fixed target rate versus capital value? And then if we have a district-wide contribution rather than a community contribution, and the rationale behind that. So that's the general rate component. Then for all of the Three Waters, we want to have the conversation around equalisation. Yes or no, and if yes, how, and then what, over what time frame. It's important to circle back and understand or reiterate what our guiding principles are for this piece of work. So we want to make sure we're compliant with legislation. We want to ensure we are honouring our obligations under Te Tiriti of Waitangi. We want to make sure there's alignment to our strategic goals, ensure we maintain financial prudence and sustainability, deliver community outcomes, consider water conservation, create a fair and equitable charging mechanism, and look at a contribution from users, so users pay for their fair share of the costs, budget considerations, and then ultimately consideration of affordability. So next steps following workshop today, we will go away and do some modelling. So what I want to be clear about is the reason why we need direction, as reiterated multiple times, rating for three waters is very complex. We have a number of different schemes that are unequalised. We have some that are equalised, and so what we end up with is a very iterative modelling process, which means that we almost have an infinite number of scenarios that we could model, which makes presenting those scenarios quite difficult. And then we have 13,000 connected properties potentially to model what those impacts are. So the point of seeking a principle-based direction allows us to narrow down our focus so that we can provide you with the modelling of those scenarios quite concisely. So, water supply. So the direction we'd like from you today is, should we model, or should all connected properties be metered? So we've talked about, I think we've got approximately 80% of our properties that are connected metered. We've got some that still haven't been metered, but there are plans in place to start metering those, and I think there are some projects going on at the moment installing additional meters. So what the direction we're seeking from you is, should we aim to target all connected properties are metered? Then it's, what is our preferred option for allocation of percentage of fixed versus variable? And so at the moment we're running at about a 40-60 split, 40% fixed, 60% variable. And should we move the lever one way or the other, more towards the variable cost, so that we're targeting a sort of user pays model? And should those with a higher capacity pay more? So if we're providing a big pipe to a property which has the capacity to provide more water, should those users pay more for that pipe size?
Sure.
Thanks, Bevan. So just in that second item, you've got fixed and variable costs. How do you define those?
That's through the revenue and financing policy. So when you prepare a revenue and financing policy as part of the long-term plan, you consider at an activity level who are the benefactors of the service that we provide, and then how should you fund it. So you can look at fees and charges, rates, proportion of rates that's fixed, proportion of the cost that's variable. So historically, metered water would sit in a fee and charge, but I think it was post 2012 when the legislation changed and actually treated metered water as a rate, not a fee and charge. So it's about how do you allocate the cost of the activity. And so at a principal level, that's where you set that percentage of 40-60.
Bevan, 80% metered. Is there some communities that are not metered at all, or is it spread across some that are metered and not metered within existing communities?
Most of the communities are metered, but we do have some that aren't metered. And I think Murupara, for example, we do have some meters, but I think it's about 95% of the properties there are not metered.
Okay, so that 20% is basically spread across the whole district, is it?
Largely in smaller pockets.
So if I may ask another question. So when you've got a place like Murupara, some metered, some not, how do you manage that? Do you read the metered ones, or do you just carry on as we've done in the past?
Well, if everyone's, the principle is if you're going to go to metered for everybody, you've actually got to put meters in everybody for a fair charge. So and that comes down to the last bullet point, is when do you actually then put it in consistently, because you can't just go and put meters in tomorrow, right? You need a period of time to put those meters in.
Yeah. So for Murupara, those that have meters, we will charge on the meter. Those that don't have metered water, there's a calculation in your rating statement that says you will pay this much for a non-metered water supply.
Thank you. I mean, I support meters. I think that's the way to go. But
So can we not enforce, because I mean, we've had some that resisted when the metering was going through Waimara and through Taniatua, that totally opposed meters being installed. Can we not enforce it? We just use the...
Yeah, we can enforce it. Yeah. And historically, the messaging around putting meters in has been initially about managing water loss.
Correct.
And we've identified significant water losses that we've addressed as a result of implementing the meters. For some of those communities, we haven't taken the next step and say we will charge based on a meter, because I think there's an element of fear about being charged by meter, but it gives the user more ability to manage the costs of water.
because it can well be that you actually end up paying less on a meter because
Correct.
of what you're using, because you can actually manage how much you use, so you've got control.
Correct.
I mean,
If you're selling a message, that's
It
what.
seems to me that if we're 80% meters, we should be trying to get to 100%. Otherwise, why bother? Gavin,
We've talked about all the communities that are metered. Is 100% of the rural community metered? Do we know that every farm and every beef block out there is metered?
All of the ones that we provide water connection to on the plains are. There are quite a few that have their own bores, and I think we've provided in a previous workshop an indication on a map of all those ones that have their own supply.
Like the Mimiha Ridge Road's got their own separate bore, and some of those Drummond's Bridge little subdivisions got their own bore, things like that aren't metered. But, okay. So what about that one where we did that extension from the McDonald Road bores to the surrounding districts when we took over John McIntosh's little scheme? Are they all metered?
That's around Otamahi.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure those
Okay.
are all metered.
Yep, thank you.
I mean, in a New Zealand context, I guess we all know, but we're actually quite advanced in terms of the amount of meters that we've got as a percentage of metering. And at LG&Z conference, it seemed to be that, that's what most councils are striving for, was my take. But anyway, thanks.
I guess for my issue is that a lot of the rurals and the industrials are the one that use bulk water, and that's fine. And I don't know whether or not places like that can claim back water charges through their tax returns and things like that. So that actually offsets the cost to them. But I am aware for the rural dairy farms, etc., for the last 2 or 3 long-term plans, we've adjusted the UAGC from 30 down to 20, which has made it a bit harder for the rating structure for farmers. And if we then do a universal charge, which I think is a bit biased at the moment, will we then just incur extra costs on the farmers that will actually hurt them more? And the reason I say that is, like, I don't mind if we just have a universal system, but what I'm scared of is if we put too many charges too quickly on our rural community, do we force the rural community to look at other ways of earning money, like pine trees and things like that, which devastate communities, and end up like East Coast? They shut down schools, shut down garages, they all disappear. And would that be a follow-on effect to us making it too hard by not only changing the UAGC, but also changing the water charges so they're actually too hard to meet? And so to me, it's actually quite a big picture that has ramifications right across the district.
Yeah, you're completely right. I mean, a rating review is just shuffling the deck chairs, right? And so that's why we wanted to ensure that we've got clear principles around why a rating review is important and why we think some of the principles we want to adhere to. So, yes, there will be impacts of, we're not going to change the level of rates we're collecting or setting. What happens is you rate somebody else. So there's always winners and losers.
I accept that, and like in the urban area, you can have two people live next door to each other and one doesn't actually water their garden at all because they got no garden. The other person's got a massive garden and uses 5 times the amount of water. And I see that is fair, that one pays more for the privilege of having a massive garden, but I'm just concerned about the effect it has on industry, especially the rural side.
Yeah, and I guess that's why I made it very clear at the start. It's about, do we or should we make a change? Then it is, how do we make the change? And then it is, why do we make the change? And we'll cover off a little bit of those later on. The point you raised at the start is that, yes, industry and business can claim GST and costs against their taxable income, whereas a residential property cannot claim either of those. So there are some benefits to having a business in terms of claiming expenditure.
Councillor Boynton.
Oh, kia ora. I thought Bevan's probably answered. I was asking, I had questions around our agriculture and horticultural industries and other commercial industries, particularly like the mill, and what impact that would be. But you've just explained that they are able to get some return as businesses that might remedy the extra costs. I did have a question around the meters. Will the ratepayers be having to pay an upfront cost for that if those are put in? Or is that just something that's taken into the cost further down the track?
You have options around how you do that, and I guess it's who owns the asset. If council owns the asset, then council should fund it as part of the whole scheme. If it's the ratepayer that owns the meter, then they would pay for it. So it depends what approach you take, but for most parts it would be the council, because we'll be replacing them when they break.
We're trying to be fair, but the word fair is subjective, so it depends who you are. Anyway, we're trying to be overall fair.
Okay, thank you.
Volumetric charging. So all the literature endorses metering, and we've already got that direction from you today. Volumetric, there are options around how you charge volumetrically. So you can have a constant amount per cubic metre used, or an increasing or decreasing charging stepped regime. So at the moment we have an increasing regime for the planes, i.e. it's a fixed charge for a certain quantity and then it steps up. For the rest of our community, it is a flat rate. You could also have decreasing charges, so once you get to a certain quantity it reduces, and that's options around some of those high users. So why you would potentially move or choose one or the other. So while you might have an increasing or decreasing rate depending on usage. So an increasing rate strongly promotes water conservation. So higher users will be incentivised to use less to manage their costs. It's useful when you have finite resources, i.e. a water supply challenges or capacity challenges. So for example, the plains, we have to supply the plains water with Otamahi water during summer because there's not enough water and capacity in the network. It also responds to some of our climate extremes, where there are drought, etc. A decreasing rate recognises the importance of industry and enterprise, and it can bring extra revenue because that high users will continue to pay more to use more, and it also protects your revenue stream a bit more.
But if they're paying more to use more, that'll be on a decreasing rate once they get above a certain volume, so.
Yeah.
So is that the best of two bad scenarios, is that they can still use the large volume, but after a certain amount it decreases, so they're still using the volume, but you're not punishing them for paying the high price for the whole lot? Okay, sorry, I was just thinking that through in my head.
But yeah, with either of those though, someone still needs to pay. And so where you have a decreasing rate, it'll be levied on those lower users. Because you still need to collect this certain amount of revenue.
But we can just keep it flat, neither
Yep.
increasing nor decreasing.
So just reiterating the current funding model. So if here we've got Whakatane, Hopi, Edgecombe, Tani Atua, Te Mahui, the equalised schemes, and Murupara. So this is this current year compared to last year. There was a 25% increase over the previous year for the fixed charge, and a 26% increase in the per cubic metre rate for the equalised schemes. For Murupara, 32% increase in the fixed amount. So that's the equalised versus non-equalised.
Yep. Sorry, Bevan, what was the rationale for such big increases?
Probably more accurate budgeting and recording through the development of the long-term plan. We also made sure that we were investing in Three Waters a lot more through the development of this LTP. So, you know, every LTP you get a chance to review the infrastructure strategy and what's required to manage this levels of service and the infrastructure that we're providing to the community. So a lot more went in, even though we had to pull that back from the needs-based asset management plan of 440 million down to 170. A lot of that work was front-loaded, and so we've got, you know, budgetary impacts of that. For the planes, we saw there was a 9% decrease in the fixed amount per connection, and then a 22% increase in the per cubic metre rate. So this is the complex part, right? So the gap led to the decrease in the fixed connection. So, you know, we talked about the operating deficit and the gap of 14 million. There wasn't a conversation around what activity did we apply that the gap or the 14 million to. And so what's happened is that's gone to the planes model, planes activity or planes scheme, and it's ended up in a reduction to the fixed charge to the planes, where all other activities or Three Waters communities have seen an increase.
Is it comparable that when you go to the urban area and you've got a connection fee of $7.98 and then you've got a $2.23 per cubic metre, and then in the rural you've got $2.94 and a metered amount of 50 cents, or if you go over a certain amount, 90 cents, is that comparable for the two schemes? So do they wash their own face for the urban with those different figures, and do they wash their own face for the rural plains area? Do they wash their face with that decreased amount of water? Or is it because
The-
the volumes are greater that helps wash its face?
Conceptually, they should, because we're required to have a balanced budget. The reality is that they're not, because it's very difficult, near on impossible, to manage them financially as separate schemes anymore. There's been so much interconnectedness of all of these schemes from a delivery perspective, from a how do you manage those assets from people on the ground, that it's near on impossible to allocate actual costs. So the answer is probably no.
Because the rural scheme is connected to Braemar, and we've just spent 5 million getting rid of the arsenic out of that. But are you saying because it's cross-connected into the Matahi, the McDonald Road Balls, but that's not also connected into urban at this stage? Oh, it is for the Edgecombe ones, isn't it?
Yeah. And the plane schemes comes right up to the airport. So those users at the very end are still on plane scheme, but the level of service that they get is very, it's a trickle feed.
Okay, thank you.
It's a relatively small pipe. I mean,
Yeah.
So, your neighbours to the north, right, Western Bay, have a not quite the same model, but a very similar model, where basically the bigger the pipe, they pay the fixed charge is proportionate to the size of the pipe. And the rationale for that is the larger the pipe, you have an ability to actually consume a lot of water over a very short period of time, and that obviously then has a significant fixed cost to make sure that that property can actually have that water to be consumed. So there, it's basically charging for the availability. Charging for the availability of the ability to use a large amount of water over a very short period of time. So these people will pay, those with a, say, 100 millimetre pipe, they'll pay $7,000 plus a variable charge for all the water they're consuming. But someone with a 100 millimetre pipe, you can see that their flow rate, compared with the standard, which I think is 20, is significantly increased. So they can actually take 700 litres per minute, compared with the average one, which is only 30. Which is, to me, that's why a number of councils, including Western Bay, actually have that policy, because it's those large users over a short period of time can use a significant amount of water.
you pay for the potential to consume, even
Correct.
if you don't.
You pay for it by your meter on top of it. Absolutely, it's
Yeah.
the potential. And so I was not around at Western Bay when they introduced this, but prior to them introducing this policy, they actually had some very large properties that were literally sucking some of their schemes dry first thing in the morning in the winter months for frost protection. They paid for all the water because it was metered, but the amount of water that was actually being used just about drained the reservoir very, very quickly.
Or frost protection.
For frost protection. That was yes. Because water's an effective way of, but that's just an example of why. But it also, then they also discovered that people had put them in historically and didn't need them, and they were able to reduce their size and reduce their cost as well.
So that connection diameter, is that just from the main line into their property?
Correct.
So the main line would have to be bigger than that?
Absolutely, yes.
Yep.
Yep. And that's why you pay that fixed cost as well, because the main, to actually have 100 millimetre, would need to be at least 100 millimetres.
Yep.
Really, that's the true user pays thing, isn't it? So that, because we've got to cover costs, don't we?
Yes, it's well, I wouldn't say it's true user pays, but it's a reflection of a more user pays policy. The problem with rating, it's a blunt instrument, and it's not a precise instrument. So, but that's the principle behind it. It's more of a fair user pays for those people who have the ability to use a large amount of water, because the council at the time was required to put in bigger pipes to service and have bigger infrastructure to service those properties.
But they're still metered, so there would
Correct.
still be
Correct.
a consumption charge.
Correct.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That table is Western Bay's charges?
I think Howard actually pulled these numbers together, but I've just literally looked at the connection fee for Western Bay from their rates, which are going to be set tomorrow, and 150 millimetre connection will pay $22,000 by way of a fixed charge.
And it's about 9,700 connections, I'm assuming count as connections. It seems low. Is it?
Oh, there's very few of them at that size. I could actually bring up the rate model if you really want to know how many connection sizes there were. So their policy is basically 40 mil, 50 mil, 100 mil, 150 mil. That's Western Bay's model.
Is that just for agriculture?
No,
and
it's for
business,
anybody. It's for anybody.
including households?
Yes.
Okay.
And if, so for example, if you've got, the standard connection size is if you've got 20 mil, that's the standard connection size. So if you've got a 25 mil, you pay $600 rather than their $400 standard fee, because their fixed costs are quite a lot higher.
So if they join up with Tauranga City Council as a multi-council CCO, and were we to join up with them, we would effectively be forced, virtually, to go with this to make it uniform, or not necessarily? Not necessarily.
So I don't want to get into the debate of the water services
What may or
entity.
may not happen.
So my understanding is, as part of the shareholder agreement, I think the existing charging regimes can be protected up for up to 10 years. Right? For a minimum of 10 years.
Okay.
It's not, right? And certainly the conversations I've had with some reasonably informed people, the Commerce Commission won't challenge that. If you've got one big, large water services entity that covers a multitude of what was council's supply, they won't be actually challenging why do the people in A community pay a different amount than the people in C community, because they came from different councils.
I'm extrapolating a bit, but the idea of simplifying, as what we might be trying to do, would be also the idea of simplifying for efficiency would apply to a large they wouldn't want every little entity doing its own thing either. But anyway, well, I don't want to jump the gun on that. Carry on.
Yeah, thank you. So that's an option you have actually got. I don't know how many is that your numbers? Those are your numbers.
Those are our numbers in terms of diameter pipe and the count of those across the district.
So if you wanted to, with your standard being, okay, you got a number at 15 mil. So you could actually have that as a reduced rate if you wanted to, because they've got potentially a lesser degree of service, but the flow rate's the same.
So we're 15 or 20 in this zone?
Or 25 by the look at it, or 25 by the look at it. Majority of yours are between 15 and 25, and that's probably historical.
So that's across urban Whakatane, and it would also apply to rural settlements?
Correct, yes?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Just another question. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for the presentation so far. So, this might be a basic question. So, with the size of the pipes, if you're, unless you're a new house, you've got no choice about what size pipe you've got, have you?
No, you've never got
You could dig it up and replace it and pay for a different size connection. So the connection, the main line that runs past your property will be
big.
much bigger and will have capacity to provide a greater water supply than what you're getting. So there is the option to come to council and say you want a bigger connection because you're setting up a business or something like that, and so therefore you can make an application for that.
Oh, so the one that goes past your gate
Main.
is this size, and then the one that goes inside to your house
Yeah.
is smaller.
Yeah, so
Generally.
for residentials, we have we put in new connections based on the building standards, and so I think there is, it's around that 25 to 32 sort of mil lines.
So if someone was going to subdivide, then that's when they might request a change of the pipe coming into the property.
Yeah,
Because there'd be more users?
or a separate connection, because if you're going to subdivide, you're likely going to want
okay,
to sell,
gotcha.
and therefore you want both of those metered.
But that also has a bearing on the size of the main, doesn't it? Because you can't just keep adding connections like we have on the Awakuri scheme.
Yeah.
And we end up with even no one's got pressure.
Yep. At some point, and this is a growth challenge, where you determine you want growth or you want to allow growth or more intensification, you'll need to actually understand what your capacity of that main line is. And at some point, it will start to impact levels of service of the supply if you allow too many connections, and so therefore you need to upgrade all the pumps, you need to provide a bigger main.
Can those water main pipes vary from community to community, or are they pretty well stock standard across urban and rural?
They would be aiming for reasonably stock standard, but generally your proximity to your treatment plants would be your bigger pipes, and then those that are servicing sort of industrial, commercial areas will have a larger main to supply, and then they sort of reduce as they get further and further away because you just don't have the pressure to fill a bigger pipe.
So is there potentially a cost again for upgrading water main lines, or?
Yeah.
That you would be paying for the growth of tomorrow, unless there was a way of clawing that back via development contributions or whatever. But we're actually, at least in the urban zone, quite blessed with really high pressure that I've experienced nowhere else. 130 PSI coming out, that you got plenty of freeboard at the moment, I would guess.
Yeah, and we do have zones where we reduce pressure because the impacts that can have on fittings and etc.
You also have to have a certain amount of pressure for firefighting purposes, legislated by government, so
Do your units not, you've got pumps and stuff, or, well, I don't know anything about fire.
you can't pump the water if the water's
If the water's
coming
not
out.
there, yeah. Unless you've got a storage, yeah.
Next one. So just carrying on from that debate about that fixed versus variable, basically, and this becomes a very much judgment decision, huh? A lot of the water supply costs are actually fixed. So that relates to predominantly, whether you've got one cubic metre going through your supply or you've got 1,000 cubic metres going through your supply, a lot of the costs are actually fixed. So the true variable costs predominantly relate to your treatment, to your your electricity, your chemicals, and it's in a smaller degree to your maintenance, but majority of the costs are actually fixed. So this is a challenge for getting that split right between your fixed charges and your variable charges. And if you look at your neighbours to the northwestern bay, right, your rate is about $280 for a fixed charge, and theirs is $400 but their water by metre rate is significantly lower. So you've got to come up with, and part of your philosophy of why you would actually have not everyone, everyone should be, in theory, should be being charged 75% in theory, if that was, you wanted 100% certainty over recovery of costs. But as we talked about, there are other drivers in terms of your philosophy for billing of water, conservation, fairness, that someone who only uses a little bit of water should only pay a significantly reduced amount, and those who are actually using a lot of water should pay a lot more. So if you went on the pure 75-25, then you would actually probably have to increase your fixed charge up, if you went on that. So it's information. It's basically a useful tool, and the issue then becomes, right, if we go to the next slide, right, having a higher one, you've got reasonable degree of certainty over your income, and for those of you who've been around for quite some time, Tauranga City Council many years ago, everybody was on a fixed charge and there were no meters. And when they moved to charging everybody 100% by way of meters, the first year, it's public information, they had $1 million shortfall in their financials. Because all of a sudden people says, if I'm paying for that, I'll actually use less. So it took them a wee while to actually work out how much people were really using. So that's about that certainty. The negatives of that approach, right? It doesn't drive water conservation. And I think there is a perception that's changing, but I remember the discussion when Tauranga went from fixed charge to meters. I've got a right to use as much water as I like, right? And I think that philosophy is probably not quite right? The ability is actually, it costs money to provide water, right? If you want to have your own water, put a rain tank in, right? And there's problems with that these days as well. So the other issue too is increased consumption can have an adverse impact on the network. And I know historically, when you have a very dry summer, there are often times that you need to put in water restrictions. As a result of meters being 100%, there are communities that actually have less water restrictions. Comments? Questions?
That whole philosophy I find really interesting because on one hand, if you have a really high fixed rate, you're taking the ability for people to control their own futures away. I mean, I've had this discussion before that when we lay out rates, that's the rates you pay and you just have to suck it up. But when the electricity prices go up, you can turn off more lights and work that very well. And like I run a wetback on mine and I've reduced my weekly power output by almost half. And when your petrol prices go up, we all stop using cars and we walk and cycle. So, but I find it really interesting with this, if you have a really high fixed charge, you take the ability away from the people to be able to control how much they're paying.
Yep.
And I always thought that if you introduced variable rates for the amount of water you're using, or the rates for the amount of volumetric charges, and people use their own water tanks and things like that off their roof, aren't you reducing maintenance costs? Because, and then you're reducing the cost of needing to upgrade the pipe.
Yep.
Because there's more users, of course, people are using less. And so overall, what sort of ratio between the less maintenance costs because people aren't using as much compared to an assured amount of money that's coming into the council? Because after the first year, it would all even out, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's, the maintenance cost is actually probably relatively small. I think the real saving is in the need to upgrade the network and put in, if you're actually then, and happened in Tauranga, they were able to defer significantly some of their upgrades to their water treatment plant because they needed more water, and also to the reservoirs. You know, reservoirs are not cheap to build, and if you can actually defer that for a number of years, or don't even need it, that's actually a significant saving in terms of the fixed costs going forward. So that's where you get your saving, not in the immediate. Yes, there is a contribution, but it's not, you know, when you...
But you get savings all the way along, because if you reduce the need to upgrade, and you don't have to take out loans from the government with so many million, you're not paying interest rates, and it affects the rates all round, doesn't it?
Well, as we saw in the couple of previous slides, your maintenance costs, your variable costs are about 25%.
I mean, it's hard to imagine how promoting waste, there can be any good coming from that. That I can think of.
And currently there is a problem for councils. Yes, that's what Watercare does it. They actually use water in as a proxy for water out. Technically, council could actually do that, but it would have to move from using water rates to a fee and a charge, and it would actually have to have another process and another collection regime if council wanted to go down that route. And you'd have to do a significant amount of work in identifying, you know, Watercare did it's 80%, but then I remember when Watercare introduced that policy, they had some very high water users that had a lot of water going in and no water going out. And the classic example that was used was they had an ice factory that produced ice. So basically all their water that they produced, so that they consumed, went out in a truck, not out in a way, didn't go out through the wastewater system in car yards and nurseries, etc. And you'd have to work out how you would actually mitigate for those properties as well. But absolutely, I think there is technology. I think Germany use that you actually pay water in and water out on a metre basis. So there is technology available. Which is a true user pays philosophy, but we haven't got that technology available in New Zealand at an affordable level yet.
But that wouldn't work with us because we have such a high percentage of our population live in little communities like Maratā and other places like that actually don't have a water out system.
Absolutely, yep.
So that wouldn't work.
Yeah, and you'd have to then have a different rate for those properties that were not connected. So it becomes, yes. But it is technically possible, but not practical at the moment.
So those ones you just wouldn't charge a wastewater metered rate because they're going to their own septic. You'd still charge for water going in, like you currently do. You just wouldn't charge wastewater.
Yep.
But I think what we're highlighting here, or what Phil's highlighted, is that, you know, there are significant positives from moving from a fixed to a variable, and those show up in water conservation, capability and capacity to service or provide for growth. So I think when I talked to Stephen Burton at TCC, he mentioned thousands of additional properties that they could put in service because of the water conservation that they experience with that move, and the deferral of significant capital expenditure. You know, that was a big one for them.
So that's with lower fixed rates?
With moving from fixed to variable. And so, you know, that might show up for us in the likes of being able to provide a better level of service to some of those areas that are being developed at the moment that are on trickle supply.
Are you looking for guidance on this? today?
Yes.
Well, I guess I'm in favour of ratcheting up a little bit, anyway.
But you wouldn't want to go 100% volumetric charging around here because you need like 25% fixed fee because you need some assurity of income to be able to plan ahead to do basic maintenance, don't you?
Yep. And I guess that's the should we, then it's how do we, and then it's when do we. So if the principle was we should move to 100% variable from a conceptual user pays, affordability, people can manage their own costs, then it is, you know, how do you deal with the challenge that is financial certainty? And so if Tauranga, for example, implemented over a 5-year time frame instead of 1 year, they mightn't have experienced that immediate shock, loss in revenue, but they would have started to build in the longer term gains that came from conservation. So, you know, we're just asking for the should we, and then we'll get to the.
But we don't have to do anything radical. We can do a gradual and see how it goes and feel our way across the river by feeling the stones, as the Chinese say.
Correct.
Oh, Tony.
Oh, sorry. I think you just sort of asked that. I was going to ask, you know, you mentioned the 5 years, so a way of being able to capture and measure properly, but also make sure we've got financial security. Are we able to start at a certain percentage and then increase over the 5 years, or how does that work?
Yes.
What Victor was saying about the gradual.
Yes, we can. So we're at a 40-60 split already, depending on your direction, as in where do you would like to get to, then it comes down to how do you start to transition to that point.
Sorry, 40 fixed, 60 variable?
Correct.
Is that where we are?
Yep.
Okay, I thought it was, all right.
It's agreed, special grading.
Yeah, it seems 40, 60.
Sorry, can you just explain the slide that's before that? Oh, no, after that, it's all right.
You're here.
No, not that one. Sorry, I was already ahead
This
on
one.
the presentation. It's the one after that, but you're getting to it.
Just point of clarification, earlier slide you had 75% fixed, 25% variable. I thought that was the general, but are you saying it's 40% generally?
It's 40-60, but I think we got an earlier indication.
Like the costs were.
Sorry, yep.
The costs were 25% variable, 75% fixed.
Gotcha.
It's the cost, not, and your actual recovery currently is 40% fixed, 60%
Yep, gotcha.
variable by metre.
Thank you for that.
But what's important to consider is that their capacity to supply is built into your 75% cost. So if you had a water supply that was built primarily to service an industry, i.e. big pumps, big capacity, and you had a dozen residential households off that supply, you've built the infrastructure to supply a big supplier. So there is capacity based on a user in consideration there, and that's 75% fixed cost.
Actually, just by way of another example, just for interest, I'm not sure how the power billing structure, what it's like here, but certainly in the Waikato, around 25% of your bill was fixed. So if you used no power, 25% was a base charge, around about 25%.
So at 40, 60, do you have are we finding that we have the financial certainty that we need? Have we got reasonable certainty at that level, or
Yeah,
not?
I mean, this hasn't changed for a long time, so we're still collecting it. This is more about a principle around do we move to a more user-paced, and how do we manage some of the impacts of affordability for some of our communities that have some challenges. So going back to again, the principles that we set out.
Obviously, the percentages are for another day, but I think we should move that way and just explore and see where it will work for different communities, like the farming community, the limited income community, etc. I think we should investigate it.
I think with the electricity example that's on it here, I think with the electricity example, I imagine the 25% line charge is covering their fixed costs because you've got so many providers of the electricity, whereas with the water, it's flipped over, right? Your line charges are 75%, but that's not how we recover the revenue. So, yeah, it's kind of, you can't really follow that electricity model in that sense.
No, I was just pointing out that actually fixed and variable does operate probably in a lot of types of billing that we get. But yeah, I imagine if you wanted to do it with waters in a more pure form, you'd be going, actually, we're going to base our fixed rate on asset depreciation, staff cost. You know, you'd have a list and you go, that's how you'd rationalise it with your consumers. I don't know.
All right, this lovely slide. Okay, so let's just say, imagine these 10,000 connections lined up from the lowest to the highest user at the 66th percentile, so number 6,600. It doesn't matter whether you have 100% fixed or 100% variable. That consumer's going to pay the same amount. And then when you go up to the 99th percentile, you can see how much of an impact moving that slider is. And then down at the first percentile, you can see again like 100% fixed versus, down to 0% fixed. It is a difference, but it doesn't impact them as heavily as a high user. So just as an example for the highest user in the whakatane scheme, if you were to charge 100% fixed, they would pay $821 a year. And if you were to flip that over and charge 100% variable, they'd pay $178,000 a year. So that's all I'm trying to indicate to you is moving the slider has got large impacts on certain people. And the further away you are from that 66th percentile, the greater the impact is for those people.
But can I just clarify there? Greg, what you're saying is, though, the majority of people, which is your up to 66%, right?
Yeah.
So 2/3 of your people will probably see a very little financial change. It's once you start getting up to the very high users is where you would actually expect to see the big swings. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
So when we start to think about your stepped changes, etc., this is where you could look at a point where you step down or you stepped up, for example.
Sorry, can you give me an example of one of our high users? Like, are we talking about a kiwi fruit farm or Fonterra or the mill?
So that one is just whakatane connection, so that will be an industry, I imagine.
Most likely.
Oh, so it's not out on the plains?
No.
Okay.
No.
Plains won't be in there, will it?
No, it's not.
I mean, Fonterra won't be in there.
What about board mills?
I'm trying to get some idea of the scope, like 178,000 for a mill.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem too excessive if more people pay less, because they can claim back the GST.
Yeah.
You know, so you've got to think about those sorts of things.
What you could do is just narrow this down to your residential, which you wouldn't see, you wouldn't see probably many that sit over the 66%, I would imagine.
I think this just indicates the joys of for me to do the modelling for you guys, there's so many different scenarios. So we've had to really kind of pick and choose what we present to you, and that's what's quite hard. Yeah, so I've just talked about that one.
Yep.
Do you want to do these ones?
I mean, we haven't actually done any modelling for the Whakatane area as if you did a big step change, right? So this is, to me, would probably want your direction as to where you want the fixed versus variable to be, and then to look at the impacts and to say, is there actually a need for a block decreasing because of that significant charge, now, right? Which is the inverse to what we've currently got on the plains. But that's a tool that is available. Some councils use it, some don't. Some go the other way, depending on your overall philosophy. But that's just an example. You would say your first X number of cubic metres will be, make it easy on my brain, at $2, and your next lot of cubic metres, you could actually do a series of step changes, then your next lot of cubic metres could be at $1.50, and your last lot, anything excessive over that, will be at $1. That's just an example of how you would do it. You wouldn't have to, but it's just an option that's available.
The question, thinking of how at the moment there's an estimate of your water usage and then it gets read. Would that still be the same? I'm just thinking about with the volumetric decreasing for people who use more water, or it doesn't matter?
I think with the estimates, you sort of go on historic usage. And then when there's a read, there's a wash up. I don't think we do estimates that often. Like we do reads twice a year and 4 times a year for those on the plains. So I don't think we'd use estimates that much, and I think it's mainly potentially for property sales and transactions where you need to try and come up with a number to go on the settlement documentation.
All right, thank you.
And without having to do zillions of models and stuff, what's the simple answer to all this?
The simplest answer would be flat rate.
Is do nothing.
Which, but then it's, you've got to understand that the impacts are at those higher end users. And so what we've highlighted here is how do you mitigate some of the impacts of some of those, and that's part of your transition planning, right? So can you mitigate the impact by transitioning through your variable charges over time? So say from 60 to 80% or 100% over a time frame. And then the other element of it is, where do you implement a stepped charge so that you're softening the impact on those larger users as well over time?
Although it's hard for us to know how much the very large industrial users can mitigate by recovering some of their costs.
So,
You won't know, like Tauranga West Bay, the full implication of it till 12 months down the road.
No. Well, I think, whatever direction you provide, like this isn't a decision-making forum, so what you do is consult with the community, and what you want to understand is those people that are impacted, so that you can understand what are the impacts and how they can be mitigated. For example, so the ice factory scenario, that you only find that out once you communicate. And so the idea is to set some principled direction and then consult with the community around what their thoughts are. Then you can start to mitigate some of the impacts over time.
So your costs are in the volume that you first supply, and then after that, it's infinitesimal, really, isn't it, in terms of, that's why you're reducing the rate to people that use more water? Is that what we're saying?
Well, that's a choice of council, whether you want to reduce the rate, you want to keep it flatlined, or you want to increase it because you want water conservation and you want to enable growth in areas where we have capacity or capacity constraints.
Tony?
Yes, I was just wondering, because the planes was excluded, with the example you provided, would that be similar for the planes? Because knowing that there's most of our horticulture and agricultural industry is out that way, would it be different or would it be a lot higher for them?
We haven't done the modelling on the planes. We do have some separate sections to identify the challenges with the planes. We don't technically provide a water supply to horticulture. And so what we're monitoring through resource consent processes is those where horticulture is going and we're saying, look, we can't provide water supply to that. It's primarily to farms, not agriculture, not horticulture.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to answer that question, Tony, if you were to look at the graph that we brought up with the moving the fixed variable slider, if you were to do that for the planes, it would look quite similar. I just don't know where the 66th percentile is, where it doesn't matter. That's going to move left or right, I don't know, but the actual overall impacts would look something similar to that for the planes.
Great, thank you. That's what I was wondering. Thank you.
So do we want to go back and just round out water's direction now?
Yeah, let's go back and round it out. So just to round out the direction we're seeking from you on water, I think I heard that you'd like all properties, connected properties, to be metered. Again, that will need to happen over time because we can't just go out and meter everything. Then it's what's the preferred option for allocation percentage of fixed versus variable. So we've got a 40-60 split now. I've heard that you'd like to move towards more variable. Do you have a rate that you'd like to get to? Say 80-20, for example, or 90-10, or 100.
37.
And do you want to and then the next bit is, how do you do that over time, and what's the time frame you implement?
And I think with that second bullet point, that slider thing comes back to your percentiles, because the faster you move from the 2/3 group, the more variability you'll see in prices at the extremes to a third of the users. So, if you move too quick, you'll get a third of users getting quite significant price changes quickly. But if you move slowly, those changes will happen, but over a longer period of time. So just also thinking about that, coming back to that.
Personally, I don't think we're too badly where we are at 40-60, but it could be tweaked a bit rather than anything radical.
But it's like plucking a number out of the air. So for me, it's what works best. What's the option that works best? And I'm not sure.
Well, that's why you do it by feeling your way. So you say, okay, we'll move it, ratchet it up a little bit, see how it goes. We can always change it.
So do you want us to say, bring us 3 options that are being modelled, or do you want us to give you one model suggestion?
Ideally, we would like a direction, so an aspirational number or a direction that we move to over time. Because we talked a bit about what are the principles around having more variable.
If you're interested in conservation, then you would want to ratchet it up a bit. right? So that would
Yeah.
be your principle-driven thing.
I'd like us to go towards 80-20 over time.
Theoretically, what would a percent a year do? So going 39-41.
Negligible.
38.
39.61.
5%.
Or 5.
You're wasting your time doing 1%.
Yeah.
5%, so
Yeah.
40, 60, and then you go 35.
35.75.
It would be interesting to see the financial modelling on that and to see what the impact is on that sort of third that has the greatest variability.
At 1%.
At 5%?
At 5%. Yeah.
Can I just say, look, I never try and argue with a chief executive, right? It's often career limiting. The issue, though, is it will be just modelling, and it won't be defined, because what we don't know is what is the price sensitivity over people's consumption. We just don't. That's the bit we will not know. We'll just have to base it on current consumption. We won't know actually if we actually increase it to 90% variable, what that price sensitivity is and how much people will actually water their garden less, wash their boats less, etc.
And I feel like that is an important step, because for councillors, they don't know what the impact of a 1% change is, or a 5% or a 10% change is. So actually having that bit of information might be quite useful in terms of getting that. I mean, I think the general guidance is our preference is conservation.
And user pays.
And user
Slide.
pays.
Otherwise you stay...
I'd like to go that 5%, but of course, I appreciate what Councillor Amick is saying, or Deputy Mayor Amick is saying, is that 2080 would be really good for the urban people. But I would like to see the effect of that on the rural people, because that could hurt. And so to do 5%, and we sit back and go, how did that go? Have I been assaulted by too many farmers as I go home? And just feel our way, because I think at some stage, 2080 might hurt people that don't live in...
Not if it's done over 10 years.
And there's the step that you can play with.
Yes.
So, if you're thinking about the rural, are we highlighting rural residential properties or rural farmers? So, the farmers, so those on the plains are paying a lower rate, fixed rate, than any of the other schemes anyway. And if you were treating it as a separate scheme, or continue to treat it as a separate scheme, it would be reasonably negligible, because there's, a couple of thousand proper connections onto the plain scheme.
So why don't we give you direction of going 80-20 and see where we go? Otherwise, we'll be tossing this around forever.
80-20 with moving 5% a year for 4 years.
I'm not sure that you want to muck around with 5% a year, do you?
Yep. 10%. 10% a year.
Yeah.
Over 2 years.
My recommendation would be, do 10, see where that actually happens, right? And if it becomes too much, then you back it off a bit, right?
Okay.
Go back to 5, right? That would be my recommendation.
Yep. Sounds good to me.
Bevan, just going back to the plains, how difficult would it be to differentiate between farmers and residential? Because
it's pretty easy.
Pretty easy, yeah.
You've got a huge amount of residential there now on a scheme that was originally set up for farmers, so surely you can have different rates for the farms?
No, what I'm suggesting is go to 70-30 first year, and then maybe do it over 2 years, right? To me, I've seen councils, and not over water, but over other changes, do it over 10 years, and it stopped after 3 because there's a revaluation and all sorts of other things. So to me is start it, see what the reaction is, right? And that's, we're not making a decision here, right? And that decision can be, it will have to be developed as part of the next annual plan, so this one's going to be adopted later this week, I understand. So we're into the new council and new annual plan next year. And to me, the annual plan is the best time to make those decisions, the first one, because then it actually solidifies it for your LTP.
And have the plains residential in the scheme at least for, that wouldn't seem fair to leave them out of it.
Yeah.
Andrew?
What about rural towns and Murupara? Is Murupara still outside of this? Yes.
Yep, yeah, so we haven't had any conversations around equalisation yet. So this is about how do we charge for the, assuming existing schemes, equalised, Murupara, plains, how do we charge? And do we move towards a more user pays model? That's this direction.
Wilson?
How would you charge residential on the plains? Because a lot of them are small blocks, which could vary from 1 or 2 hectares through to a 20 hectare block with a house on it. How do you differentiate what's residential and what's livestock?
Well, at this point, we everything that's in the plains gets charged the plains rate, no matter how much water they use. They'll get the fixed charge and then the volumetric charge. There's a complex formula based around the original allocations. When a subdivision occurs, how do you create a new allocation for that smaller lifestyle block or that residential block? And it's based on area, not use. So at the moment, you end up with some very complicated and different allocations across all of the plains based on that history.
We're at slide 25 out of about 40. Does anyone want to take a break? Or just
Yep.
Yep, we'll take 15 minutes.
Did you want to just...
Oh, yeah, we'll do that one and then...
You just want to... So we've got a direction on the allocation percentage, fixed versus variable. The last one is should those with the higher capacity, the bigger pipe, pay more as the fixed charge?
I think so.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Agree.
I think if your general philosophy is tilting towards user pays, then that would be right. What the exact ending point is, we're not quite sure on though.
Just backing up a little bit it's my fun job to do the modelling. So if I was to go away and come down 10% each time, there's infinite number of people that's going to impact. Well, it's not infinite, but I could come to you with 100 pages of graphs, right? Who would you want to see those impacts on? Like, what does it look like? I showed you before, say, like the first percentile and the 33rd and the 66th and the 99th. How much, how widespread would you want to see those impacts?
For me, if I may, your worship, I think we should just deal with the one we're talking about, and otherwise you'll have so many variables we won't know where we're going really. From my point of view, if we're 70-30, let's focus on that and see what it looks like. Is that what?
Yeah.
I've got a suggestion for Greg, right? I suggest we only show 5 groupings, right? And I wouldn't show the 1% or the 99th, right? Because that's only one, right? Very few people. I would actually go, so the 50th percentile is generally Joe average, but it depends on, it's not quite, right? So I would go your bottom 10%, your next 30, 50, 70 and 90, right? And any would highlight any significant outliers that we identified, right? So you might actually have 4 properties that are paying an exorbitant amount, right? Which are technically standout ratepayers, and being a standout ratepayer, there is an obligation under the consultation to actually highlight them because they're actually significantly impacted more than Joe average. But that's what I would be recommending. No more than 5, otherwise this guy will have.
Yep.
Right? You'll be overloading his computer, as well as his, I don't want to say his brain, because it's got more capacity than mine. You happy with that, Greg? Yeah. Yep.
So we're coming back to this? 15 minutes?
Yep. Done,
15 minutes,
We're done on the water
We're
ones.
done on water.
Yeah.
Yep.
10:35.
Right, thank you. So the next area we'd like to talk about is stormwater. So we'd like to seek some direction from you on should all commercial industrial properties out across the district. So at the moment, the commercial industrial properties in town, in Whakatane, are charged a 2.2 differential. Should that be consistent across the whole district? So, and I guess the principle on that is generally commercial industrial properties have a larger proportion of impermeable surface and therefore potentially contribute to stormwater or exacerbate stormwater needs more than residential properties. We're also wanting direction on what the preferred allocation percentage, again fixed target versus capital value, and then we want some direction around whether there is a district-wide contribution rather than community focused contribution and the rationale behind that. So we modelled the district-wide 2.2 commercial factoring and also 30% general rates stormwater funding as per the previous direction in the workshop. Rolling out the district-wide 2.2 commercial factor will redistribute about 120,000 from residential properties to commercial. It will require some additional rate codes in the system, which makes things a bit more complicated. It's easy to roll out if stormwater was equalised, because like I said at the start, stormwater hasn't had the benefit of equalisation over time, and therefore is still very ring-fenced at a community level. And so some of the impacts of small changes in the past for stormwater have been, driving significant cost increases. So as an example, we went through the development of the last long-term plan. We did a whole bunch of work around redefining what our overhead allocations are, and the results of that have been some significant increases in some of the stormwater areas. So Te Māhui, for example, had a 300% proposed increase in stormwater rates because of $20,000 of overhead allocation. So that's the impact of not having spent any attention on stormwater and going through the equalisation process. Small dollars can make some big movements to some smaller communities. We haven't modelled that to a large degree because it affects only a small group in terms of the commercial industrial properties across the district. Collecting up to 30% of stormwater from general rates could generate an additional, reallocate 1.5 million from outside current stormwater schemes. But all of this stormwater needs to be equalised to support any of those changes because it's too complex.
Bevan, at what point does stormwater come under regional council? Is that at town boundaries, is it?
Pretty much. Yeah, so regional council in the urban and rural environment where they have catchment management plans. And then as it crosses into the urban environment, that's our point of delineation.
So I've chosen the 10th, the 50th and the 90th residential percentiles just to give you an indication of what the impacts would be on those people. So as you can see, there's some wins and losses depending on which scheme you're on. And then if you go to the next slide, Bevan, and then you've got the 90th percentile, there, and then you've got the general, if we were to do a general rate contribution for those people that are currently not paying any stormwater. So is there any questions on those graphs?
So I guess what that's highlighting there is if we went towards a 30% general rate contribution, those properties that are not connected to stormwater or not in a stormwater defined area with a value of 2.38 million will be paying probably about $220 as a contribution towards stormwater. That's the 90th percentile.
And what would they be paying at the moment?
0.
Okay.
So currently for stormwater, in terms of the fixed versus variable, it's 25% fixed and 75% variable, based on capital value. So capital value, again, is a good proxy for a non-permeable surface or exacerbator to stormwater. Unlike water supply, moving the slider doesn't change behaviour, because you can't control behaviour with stormwater. So the CV is, the capital value is fixed, so there's no choice to either use more or less. Increasing the fixed proportion above 25% will increase rates to lower value properties and reduces rates on the higher value properties. But increasing that variable portion above 75% will decrease rates on the lower value properties and conversely increase rates on higher value properties. I think we are, yeah.
Across our district, Bevan, are there areas that have bigger stormwater issues than other areas of the district, or it's over a 50-year period and that it's spread evenly across the district?
We do definitely have other areas that have significant challenges, and a lot of it's to do with where groundwater levels are. Edgecombe, for example, we have a lot of inflow and infiltration because of high groundwater levels, but that's sort of impacting the wastewater network, not so much the stormwater network, but it's all very related. So stormwater will be quite different in different areas based on sort of elevation and surrounding environments. But the way you approach and manage them, or we approach and manage them as an organisation is very similar.
Bevan, do we have situations where the regional council drains run into our drains? And how do we manage that?
Yes. Good example is in Ohope, I think it's Marae Totara, the drain that runs through there. At the point it hits where the houses are, it's our responsibility, and we've been doing a lot of fix-ups where we've had floods in it, and regional council, for example, may put some gabion baskets or do some rock walling, and what happens with water is it'll ping pong off those hard surfaces and start eating out the other side of it. And so we've had to do a number of works in those areas. Wainui Te Whara, another challenging area where we've got lots of sort of downstream implications of that. In Awatapu Lagoon, silt management, all sorts of stuff. Matata, for example, there's heaps. No. Possibly, but yeah, not not at this stage.
Well, I'm just thinking you're putting a load on the ratepayers, but it's not actually, some of it's not our load, is it?
Yeah, but I guess the challenge then is where we have sought contribution in the past, the regional council will just charge the catchment.
Yes.
And the catchment can be a much smaller number of people than potentially us charging it as a general rate or part of the whole district. So the burden can be quite significant.
Could a good example of that be Waimana with the river catchment schemes that operate there?
Potentially. I mean, I haven't had too much involvement with those, but from my Portuguese days, the river catchment costs and schemes were probably the highest in the country for managing the Waiweka and Otara river schemes. Well over $1,000 for a residential ratepayer in town. So that, it's those are significant costs on potentially small numbers of ratepayers. So we jump back to the direction we're asking for. So we'd like your direction on whether we apply the 2.2 differential outside of the whakatane boundary for commercial industrial.
Yep. Tick.
And what is the preferred split between fixed and capital value? So at the moment it's 25/75. Would you like to see that move, acknowledging that increases to fixed impacts low value properties, decreases to fixed and impacts high value properties?
No.
So it's currently 25/75, so 50/50 will double the charge on a low value property. Double the impact. Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Does that work for you guys?
No change is good news.
And then the last one is around a general rate component. So we've modelled 30% general rate component. We'd like your direction on whether you'd like to proceed with that.
Sorry? Sorry? You talk about the impact? Passing it down the line.
So I guess at the moment you've got 7 or 8 individual schemes. 8 is it? Yeah. And we are ring fencing the users that are directly in that area, and then we are assigning a cost, and then we're distributing it across them. What we're bringing to you is the idea of, is stormwater a community-wide benefit? So if you don't live in that particular area, but you have access to come into town to go to the hospital or go to the supermarket or go get your car fixed or something, is that a benefit to you that the stormwater system is giving you access to your district? Or should that burden be only on the people that directly live in that little area? So if you were to the revenue and finance policy says at the moment that you can charge up to 30% as a general rate for stormwater. So if you were to implement that, it would then put was it $2.38 million property would pay about $220 towards the stormwater for the whole of the network, for the whole district. And then that would reduce those individual people's costs that are currently paying it.
Tony?
Oh, I was just checking. I couldn't hear what anyone else was saying, but the third one there with the district-wide contribution, is that basically asking us if we want equalisation?
No. That's asking
Oh,
whether you want a
okay.
general rate contribution towards stormwater. So should all properties within the district pay an amount towards managing stormwater across the district, given that the benefits of good stormwater management benefits everybody in the district.
Oh, okay. I was just, because I was just looking at that table. What is that table reflecting? The table that you had with the difference amounts and what areas increased? What's that reflecting again? Sorry if I missed it.
I mean, I guess it's saying, like, if somebody lives in Galatea and doesn't have to worry about stormwater, but they still reap the benefits of stormwater management because they come into Whakatane Central Business District, should they have to pay something for that, or do they just continue as they are?
And it's very connected
Oh, is
to
that what?
the roading network as well. So a lot of our stormwater network connects to road,
So,
and in the urban environment, it connects to drains alongside
Yes.
the road, and that's all managed
That's a
under
good
roading.
point. So I would guess I would say yes on that.
Yeah, yes, I probably would too. Mainly because if Whakatane is the main service centre for most of people shopping and everything else like that. Thank you.
So I would support that district-wide as well, because we all benefit.
Right, done. Right. Now into an equalisation.
Right, so just a reminder of the complexity around our current arrangements. So like I mentioned at the start, we've spent some focused time with equalising drinking water and equalising wastewater, and we've left some areas outside of the equalisation conversation because of affordability challenges at the time or other pre-existing arrangements. And what we haven't touched is the stormwater activity, and as you've got there, we still maintain separate schemes for those, and charge separately and differently for each of those. So this is the conversation around should we equalise. So, do you want to speak to these bits?
Big question for you, Bevan. Does the Tahuna Road water supply come under equalised? Under Otumai? Or does it come under the plains? Because it's a bit of a mixed bag there, eh? So.
Yeah, so we've got Tahuna and Johnson Road, which supplement the water supply, so they're not the main ones. I don't know the exact answer to that one. I think it probably sort of sits outside of plains, possibly.
I thought that Tahuna Road was a primary supplier until something went down, and then we tap into both Otumahi and the plains.
Yeah, I need to check. I'll check that for you.
Thank you.
So we've had this discussion in the past about wastewater, and basically Murupara is sitting outside of the current equalised scheme for everybody else. And because they've got significant capital works in the near future, there's only 800 connections there. I think we all have agreed in the past that it's a burden that they can't take alone. It's just unaffordable, and that, basically would be why you would want to equalise them and bring them into the rest of the network. So this graph just shows the impact that it is going to put the price of Murupara up.
If we did it in one lump sum.
Yeah, if you did it in one go, yeah.
That's
So that-
annual cost, is it?
Yeah.
No, it's not so bad.
Yeah, so wastewater's 100% fixed charge. There's no variable component to wastewater currently.
Is the Edgecombe and that's part of the equalised scheme?
Yes.
So Matata, when that comes on, that would be equalised as well?
Yeah, the principle of behind the Matata project is that it would fall into the equalised scheme.
Rotahuna's population, does anybody happen to know?
No, but we
Very,
don't.
very low compared to.
We don't have wastewater in Ruatahuna.
Yeah, they're all on septics, yeah, true.
When you say, Bevan, that all of Whakatane district will help pay for the equalisation to bring Murupara on?
When it comes time to spend money, and we are on that process of consent renewal program, we've got 30 million assigned to the Murupara treatment plant associated upgrades. Time's the equaliser, right? So if you keep schemes separate, at some point there's going to be some big shifts, and these are imminent for Murupara, and so the timing's now to start thinking about, should we bring Murupara into the equalisation, because we know that at very, very shortly in the near future they'll be paying significantly more if they stay outside of the scheme.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
And this is the real problem we have compared to a community like Kauro that's all in one little blob.
Yeah.
And Aporiki, we've got small satellite communities, and our largest community is not that big either, so we're sort of in a not a very good spot.
Yeah.
But
So if we
we want
don't,
it to be equitable as much as
if we
possible.
don't equalise, and then we have a wastewater treatment plant put into that space, what would be the implications for them then? As far as what would it cost them in comparison to if we didn't equalise?
Massive.
Be huge,
So we've got a couple of thousand ratepayers or properties, $30 million project. It's big. It depend on how you broke down the capex and what term you decided to repay that loan over, but it would be unaffordable for that community on their own.
And that's a treatment plant that'll be discharging not into the river, but the provinces onto the whenua. Okay.
The trick is to try and get the cost of that plant down as low as possible.
But is 30 a realistic figure? Because I thought in one of our reports it was getting closer to 40 than 30.
We haven't done a lot of detail yet, I don't think, on Murupara in terms of design or quantums. I think we've got 30 million in the budget, which is going into our water service delivery plan. David's nodding his head. So, there's a fair bit of, no pun intended, water under the bridge to go through before we can nail down what an actual figure is. There's the change to the standards. There's the aspirations. Trying to lock down land. All of that sort of stuff all adds or can remove cost.
I mean, the trick is to control aspirations. Yeah. Standards, they've helped us a lot because they've made them fairly lenient.
But it's changing.
Beg your pardon? Well, they will make them more lenient. I mean, if the ones that have tabled get through, then they're not they're actually quite beneficial to us in many ways, from a cost point of view.
Mr. Chair, I know what, this is not the subject for this forum, but, and we talked yesterday about, do you actually move away from reticulated systems in these small communities because of the cost? And go to on-site with a fancy septic tank system, which would be miles cheaper than 30 million.
There has been, I'm aware of some conversations in some other parts of the country where that's happening. It's going to be completely down to what's the environment that you're potentially putting, you're reverting back to septic tanks, river proximity, what's the, well, is it not congestion, but, how intense is that township? Yeah, so there's a lot to work through.
What's it going to cost the individual residents over there to put in their own systems? Probably be outside of the
Not better.
affordability.
Not better.
Hi guys. Sorry, I've just been in and out of our meetings. I've got contractors on site. Okay, I've been listening to this conversation going around. I know it's going to be tough on Murupara. I also think about Minganui and our other isolated places, but to equalise it, that's a conversation we're going to have with Murupara. It is the best option. Don't like it, but it is the better option. The other one, I would cringe, what would the costings look like and the impacts of if the town was to take it on its own? And I can't actually see that. It'll be interesting with the conversations around it, how that gets communicated out, because we also have our Māori relationship strategy team working alongside with our iwis out in our rural areas out this way. It's a conversation that needs to be had, but I would support that equalisation.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it.
If we are to look at an equalisation, can we stage that over a number of years, bearing in mind the high deprivation? Also, has the conversation been had with Ngāti Whare, Ngāti Rang, in Murupara? Are they in favour of ground as opposed to river discharge, aren't they?
That's a separate conversation to this.
Yeah.
I understand that the consent program is working with Ngāti Manawa on what are the options around the wastewater treatment plant associated upgrades and where it's going to discharge to. But yeah,
that's at a cost as well, though, isn't it?
Sorry?
That, whatever the outcome there, it comes at a cost as well, doesn't it?
Yes, and that's what your 30 million budget's for.
And that's what I said, it's critical that you pick an option that's actually achievable at a reasonable cost, rather than the gold-plated U-Butte.
Yeah. I guess another thing to highlight here is the chickens are almost coming home to roost in relation to the underinvestment in Murupara. We've had lots of challenges and we've kept Murupara out for a long time from equalised, and we've to try and manage the rates impact on that community, which therefore limits how much we can spend on that community in terms of maintaining the infrastructure, because we're very worried about the cost. Having an equalising means that it opens up the door for more investment without the significant financial impact to those 800 connections. And time is of the essence, because we know that there are some significant projects that we've got planned for Murupara: water treatment plant, wastewater consenting, processes and a lot of catch-up work for renewals.
The question was asked, what's the impact on Murupara, right? And I've just done some very quick back of the envelope. It was an envelope, not a cigarette packet. Calculation, $30 million, over 25 years at 4% interest for 800 properties, each property repaying $2,500 per annum, just on interest and principal alone without operating costs. So that's ballpark what they would be paying. Right? That interest and principal cost on an annual basis is about $1.9 million. Just for context.
Just about the idea of Murupara waiting or bringing in an incremental stage of equalisation, you're kind of asking, can we stay back here and not pay more until we need you guys to come and pay for us? You see what I mean? Like, it's if you want to be equalised in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of unfair on everyone else if you were to sit back and just wait until it suited you, as opposed to the whole of the community.
Back to the affordability there.
So is it basically saying the difference would be an increase, if it equalised, the difference is about an extra $250-$60 per year for those costs for Murupara now, as versus if they had to pay for it themselves, it would be an extra $2,500 a year.
On my guess, it would be an extra $3,000 by the time you add operational and maintenance costs into it. Well, sorry, not an additional. The cost would be go from it would be an extra. Sorry, yes, it would be an extra $2,500 because the cost would likely to go from what they're paying of roughly $500 now to probably over $3,000, well over $3,000.
Yeah.
And would it show
That's
on?
if they had to pay for it themselves.
Correct. Yes. There will be also an increased cost for the people of everyone else as well, because those costs would need to be absorbed by everyone.
No, that wouldn't include the equalisation cost, would it? Would it?
It would.
It would. Yeah.
And would it show on our bills in Whakatane and Hopi that that's the Murupara equalisation?
No.
Right?
It
would just be all.
So, I don't want to speak for the rating staff, but normally what I would anticipate there would be if you're equalising, there would be a district-wide stormwater, a wastewater rate of X, right?
All right, okay, that's fine.
Okay.
I suppose that's assuming we can borrow with it.
Thank you.
So
And that still doesn't account for where we're at with Matatari either, does it?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
At the moment, Murupara is the only one that is currently outside of the equalisation conversation.
Yeah.
We don't have a rate for Matata yet, but the premise of the project, Matata project, is that it would come into the equalised scheme. So the only one we're presenting to talk about at the moment is what we've got currently in terms of existing rates. This is the only slide we have on this topic. So can we get some direction?
Yes.
Yep.
No, Peter said yes, Tony said yes, yep.
Cool. All right.
Here you go, Greg. You're speaking on behalf of Howard.
So just some further information about the Plains water supply. So I have put there, it's only 32 years young, because as an asset, pipes do tend to have a 100-year or 80-year life. But they were farm grade, and they were put in there to supply 195 properties, and now they supply 2,000 properties. They're small in diameter. They're not, from what I'm not the engineer, I'm just going off what I've been told. They're not high pressure. They're not what a modern water utility would install. So they're no longer fit for purpose for the 2,000 properties that they're serving, as opposed to the 195 when they were put in. So this has led to a large amount of leaks, which we see in the remissions of water rates out there. I don't know that that's why they do their rates every quarter for the planes, but I would guess that it's because that's how they monitor where the leaks are, as opposed to every 6 months you do the water in town, so you can get to your leaks quicker on the planes. And due to supply issues, Otamahi has basically been turned on at times, and it's feeding into the plane system, and it's not easily monitored how much of an impact Otamahi's having on them. So if we go to the next slide. So depreciation is much cheaper on small farm grade pipes. So in reality, to replace them with larger, higher pressure, higher grades will cost a lot more money, but we depreciate primarily on replacement costs. You can do depreciation on future, like 30 years of renewals. That is one option, but that would mean that you'd be paying significantly more on the planes if you were to start implementing a much higher funded depreciation. Just actually on that note, 17.5% of the district's water users are on the plains. 190 kilometres of the 450, or about a third, of the pipes in the district are on the plains. Half of the water that's supplied in the district is on the plains, and only 6.2% of depreciation for the whole of water supply relates back to the plains. So that just shows you how cheap that network of pipes is, that they only come to 6.2% of depreciation. And that's the problem with the farm grade pipes, is they're just not high quality, they're cheaper. So the CapEx upgrades on the plains has previously been deemed unaffordable and undeliverable, even though the plains do pay a lot less for their water than everyone else. Equalisation will allow the plains to move forward so that they can start to replace those pipes with the bigger, higher quality pipes. And if you were to have higher variable charges on the plains, I think that would drive a lot of conservation, and then that would also help some of the short-term issues that they're facing at the moment. Then, any questions on the plains?
Would a cheaper option be just make the residentials on the plains put water tanks in? Because you've gone from 195 users to 2,000. Primarily it was set up for livestock. Is it that essential that they're on town supply?
The residentials?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's worthwhile thinking about what's the quality of the water that we provide there now, and what was the investment we put into the Braemar treatment plant to get it to drinking water quality standards. And then it is, where should that drinking water quality go? And so should we be forcing residential users to put in storage to get access to high drinking water quality, versus not providing that sort of, not requiring farms to put in storage? It seems a little bit incongruent with the recent upgrades, and I guess the requirement to provide drinking water quality there.
Can I just make an observation? I think the problem with the plains is we've already made a whole lot of decisions. Well, previous councils have made a whole lot of decisions that are now coming home to roost, right? The other challenge you have is if you wanted to go and say, well, the residential people need to have a lower standard, right, by having their own tanks, you would now run into problems with our good friend, the water regulator. Because having supplied water already, it's very, very difficult to go backwards. The process currently to go backwards, where you say is we're no longer to supply water, requires a binding referendum. Right? And I've only seen that happen once, where the cost was going to be significant. Yeah. And then they also required council support, even if they did go backwards. So to me, is once, and the fact that you've now got 2,000 properties compared with the original 195, that's where you've opened the gate and all the horses have run out, right? And now we're trying to shut the gate with no horses left. That's my independent view of what has happened with the plains. And yes, we do have some historical issues with particularly the large farms that are on the plains that are actually using significant water, and there is, as part of the equalisation process and the pricing, there is an ability to take them into account as almost a group of standout ratepayers rather than trying to say it's too hard. That's my view, if I could be so bold.
The original 95 were commercial outfits, and the 2000 now, what's the breakdown between commercial and just residential?
Greg's probably got a little bit of work on that, but it'll be a mix of sort of lifestyle properties and residential properties in the rural area.
And commercial?
Have you got an estimate of the cost to put in commercial grade piping?
No. That'll be all tied up into that water strategy work that was originally presented and I think made its way into the infrastructure strategy about, upgrading all the pipe work to create a ring main sort of function and feature on the plains so that we can provide a greater continuity of supply. So the challenge is at the moment we can't, because of the quality and the size of the network, we can't provide a good reliable supply. And I was just talking to ex-councillor Gerard Van Beek just before, and he was saying he needs to put in water storage to provide water supply to his cow shed, because we just don't have the capacity to provide water that's required. And, it's not just isolated to the residential properties out towards the airport, which get a trickle supply. It's the same with some of our farms as well.
But of the 2,000, the smallest proportion, in terms of numbers, are the commercials, but they are also the lion's share of the consumption, right? Most of the Braemar scheme water goes to agricultural use.
Yeah.
So of the 2,000 plains customers, 1,388 are showing as residential and lifestyle, 210 are showing up as dairy, and 190 are showing up as other things, might be horticultural, industrial. So it's a little bit blunt because I'm using the QV data, which lists every property as one of those different options. But yeah.
QV can be wrong.
And QV can be wrong, and people can subdivide or start putting avocado trees on these, they're horticultural and it hasn't been updated. So a little bit crude, but 1,400, say roughly, are residential and lifestyle properties.
So that gives us an idea anyway.
because of them, I know in my own situation and that, like I lease neighbouring properties and that, which the water usage is contiguous, but they've also got their own houses. So your data wouldn't be telling you the full usage because I'm using water through my own meters, and not theirs. It's a tricky one.
Yep. Move on. Do we need that?
Cover this one first.
So the impacts of equalisation for water supply. So Murupara would see a slight increase, but because 95% of Murupara is not currently metered, they do pay what is currently the nominated amount is 230 cubic metres of water a year. So that's just, it's almost like a fixed charge for them. And the other 5% would see increases, but again, they're 5% of the whole area. Plains connections would see an ascending increases, so the higher the user you are, the even higher proportion of increases you're going to see. A step down variable rate would help resolve the large increases for the high users, if that was what you were wanting to do. Moving the fixed variable slider towards more fixed and less variable would help resolve large increases to high users. Introducing the fixed charges based on connection size that we've talked about will have a small impact, mostly on those big users once again. So there's just so many moving parts to this discussion, and like we can bring up one thing and we can say it's going to do this, and then we can talk about another and it's going to do that. So it is quite difficult to present to you, the sum of the parts, I guess. So.
I mean, if we take the pure volumetric, 100% volumetric, when everybody pays for what they use, and there should be no reason for, there will be no reason for a commercial user to pay less than a residential user on that pure extreme version. And if we come back the other way, then the residential user is effectively subsidising a commercial user. Is that?
Yeah.
And why should that be? I could argue.
I guess it comes down to that. We've said 75% roughly of the cost of the water supply network is a fixed cost. So whether you turn your tap on or not, the pipes going past your house are about 75% of the cost. So is that a privilege or a right? Like, should you have to pay for the fact that you've got it available? It's your choice not to use it, but it's still, as a community, we're supplying them water. And as you head towards that higher variable, you're basically saying that those people that do want to use the water occasionally shouldn't have to pay their fair share for the network that's in the ground. Well, that's just my opinion, sorry.
No, right, but here we're talking about plains versus others. So it's not quite the same.
So that works for any scheme. If you're changing the variable in the fixed slider, it doesn't matter if it's plains or Whakatane. People on the plains that are low users, if you've got a high variable charge, are going to pay a lot less, so therefore they're not paying as much towards that privilege of having the network running past their door.
Well, we've already got a steer from
4 metres
you.
of network per person, whereas in the dense area you've got less pipes per person, less metres per person.
So we've already got the steer from you on the fixed versus variable slider. This is about, should we equalise the plains into the and I guess Murupara into the wider equalised schemes.
I can't see why you wouldn't. I mean, it's going to be, I'm not calling it a pilot, but it's actually, we're not going to find out for another year's time after the decision or its implementation about the true impact of it. But I think we've got to put some change in there to equalise.
Gavin?
Okay.
Yep.
So we'll come back with the culmination of the direction you've provided previously. And we'll do the splits, the 10%, 30%, 50, 70 and 90 that we already agreed. And then we'll put some special focus around what are those outliers, because those outliers are where you might want to look at some of your other levers that you have, and it could be time frame for when you'd implement, or it could be that's where you start to look at your step down charging regime to mitigate the impacts.
Can I ask a point of clarification just with that last line on this slide here? So you're saying that when Murupara get equalised, they'll only basically paying $18 more than what they would be currently?
Yes.
Yes, currently, yeah.
Currently.
Yeah.
Okay. That's per annum?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Stormwater, so equalisation and the 30% general rate. I think we got that. So,
Sorry, just a point of clarification on that. That's for water supply only?
Yes.
The extra $30, yeah, just so everyone's clear.
Yeah, not for the waste, yeah.
Yeah.
And is that, for clarification, is that including equalising high users, the big farms?
sorry, say that again.
Yes, I see your question.
Is that, if you're going to use equalisation on that, you're also going to put extra costs on the big users, on half the plains scheme?
For equalising?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's part of bringing back the numbers. What we want to understand is what are the impacts for those high users, and that's where I talked about what are your levers to mitigate those impacts on the high users.
Okay.
So this is the principal conversation around should we equalise and the rationale behind it, and the need for investment and the impact on small numbers of users. And then it is, okay, what is the impact of that over time, and how do you manage that?
Yeah.
And when you're talking Murupara, are you talking Murupara urban versus, does that include Galatea and all of those producers out there?
No, because they're not on a council supply.
No, okay, so it's just the urban area.
Right.
We already covered stormwater, so Greg, do you want to talk to this?
So what I've taken is the 50th percentile capital value for each town and settlement based on one pan per property, and using the 50th percentile of water usage on the scheme. So this is an approximate amount of what those people are going to go up or down by, and you can see where it's lying and so forth. So the big one, I guess, is the plains, that 50th percentile property in the plains using the 50th percentile of water. They don't have a pan, and they have got a large increase, but then they're also using the 50th percentile on the plains is using significantly more water than everyone else's 50th percentile, right? So it's I wouldn't say misleading, but you just have to be aware of the fact that they're using a lot more. So.
So again, sort of next steps, we will take this direction, model of scenarios that we discussed, and then bring that back to you, and we'll be looking to put a report together to sort of look at what the next steps are around consultation. But I think what I wanted to ask, and this has sort of come up recently, somebody that hadn't I guess been on the journey with council in terms of the number of workshops that we've had, the rationale, the problems. So someone in the community asked me, why are we doing this now? You know, when we think local water's done well, potentially an entity will come in and do it all. So what I wanted to get a feel from you is it important as a council, as an organisation, to do this piece of work ahead of a water service entity doing it? Are there some political risks and challenges around doing it? And so I wanted to get a bit of a steer around whether you wanted to continue on this journey. And what we'd be looking to do is try and nail down an approach with you, and then go out to the community with consultation. So I guess, you know, part of wrapping it all up, if we think about a bit of reflection around where we got to and why we're here, it's, you know, historically equalisations appears to have occurred as needs arose, i.e., you know, as investment, we needed to put investment in a particular area or a scheme, the costs outweighed made it cost prohibitive for the community, so we equalised. So we haven't done that proactively in the past. So the investment related schemes that remained outside of equalisation have been underinvested in due to those rating impacts. So that's that tail wagging the dog kind of thing. When we recap on what the current situation is, you know, we've got an extremely complex rating system. It has the perception of being inefficient and inequitable in some cases, i.e., you know, we can't charge overheads to some areas because the cost impacts are significant. We don't manage assets like separate schemes anymore. In fact, we have a team that works on all three waters all at once, and they manage the assets based on their technical aspects of it. So we have a water treatment team. They manage water treatment and wastewater treatment. We have a reticulation team. They look after waters, wastewater and stormwater reticulation. That, you know, they're not working on schemes or allocating costs to individual schemes. Water supply across the plains is interconnected with Otamahi and other supplies already. So, you know, Otamahi supplements at Braemar in summer when the farms are using more water. In general, Otamahi users pay for this, not the plains, and that's because we don't have interconnected meters that meter all of the water that's going between all these interconnected supplies. We've got some significant water losses on the plains. Approximately $500,000 of our revenue is remitted for water losses on some of these farm grades networks. Stormwater's largely been untouched, and we've got 8 schemes. Reviews of our overheads are talked about, led to a 300% increase on the rate for Te Māhoi. We had to unwind that. It was unpalatable. We've got large costs looming in the near future, and these costs will massively impact small and unequalised schemes in the next few years. Development to the western side of the river is limited to trickle supply due to higher users being closer to the Braemar supply. So generally, the closer you are to the treatment plant and the supply, the better capacity and level of service you get. The further you get out, the less of a level of service you have. And without a charging regime that promotes conservation, that sort of behaviour will continue. And there's no real incentive. If you're paying a very small amount, there's no incentive to fix leaks or conserve water. Some of the consequences of not equalising, ultimately it's going to be forced upon us by a water service entity or a government for those users of water. It would be better for council to introduce the equalisation early, which allows you to have more input or control around how and when you implement the changes you need, rather than delay or be forced into a shortened transition, if any transition at all, by a water service entity. Current funding for the plans isn't sustainable in the short term, so there needs to be some intervention of some description. And I guess that, not working through this kind of fits the narrative that central government paints of local government, is that we shy away from some of the hard decisions, or some of those hard conversations. So the other element is to think about what does equalisation, and what does this piece of work that we're doing as a council, how would that look to a water service entity or to DIA or to central government? And I think, it would be looked upon favourably, right? If we're looking for partners that are willing to join or accept us, if we've done the hard yards, if we've done some of the things that they would be wanting to do in the future, it positions us in a better light. So, we've already got a large proportion of our water supply metered. That's significant benefit to any water service entity taking on whakatane. And if we work through a process of equalisation, that's even better. I mean, from a water service entity, they call it price harmonisation. There's been lots of conversations around price harmonisation across a lot of the councils, and Thames Coromandel, for example, I think they're open to price harmonisation in the long term, even though they know in the short term it's going to have a negative impact on some of their ratepayers, because they're bought into the long term. So I think it would be looked upon favourably by DIA and central government as well. And then I guess, like I said, the impacts of time's the big equaliser. Where we spend money, if we leave those schemes outside of equalisation, it has a big negative impact, and you end up doing it anyway.
There was a good sales pitch, Bevan, and I support you going forward with what you're proposing.
Yep, I'm the same. I mean, I was thinking we're doing this in preparation for if and when we move to a CCTO, and to show some leadership between with our other communities and councils that we might be working with. And if we don't go to a CCTO, then at least it might give us a few tick boxes with DIA. Yep.
I guess I'm wondering about this bit of going out to a completely different table, perhaps. You're going to have to do it all over again. I mean, the decision point will be made by a different table.
The decision at the end of a consultation process would likely be made by a different table, but you've got the opportunity to set your position that frames the consultation piece of work.
I suppose the danger is, if I may, Mr. Chair, is that when we go to consultation, and this is generally, our members of the public don't actually understand. And I guess that's a challenge for your comms and sort of things, to actually try and lay it out so that they get some sort of feel for where it is and why we're doing it, really, I think.
Yeah.
But it's the right thing to do. But
yeah.
Yes, absolutely right, John. And I think if you can help us to articulate this to our people in layman's terms, summarise what you've just told us, that'll go a long way for us to be able to sit in front of them and be comfortable in saying that we support this. So if we can have that, I think it'll be we can go communicate that, as well as the comms that are coming out of council. I think the big part is about us going to stand in front of them and saying this is why.
Yeah.
Justifying it.
Tony,
Support.
and then Peter.
Yes, thank you, Bevan. I agree. I support us moving forward with this plan. We've got an opportunity now to really ensure that we have direct input in what we want to be able to influence with the new water entity, but also too so that our communities are looked after as much as we can in this time and through the consultation process. So I fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you for all the hard work, gentlemen.
That was a great story, Bevan. Totally in support of what needs to happen to move forward. Thank you for teasing out I think what's going to probably bring light to this is there's a lot of, you're right, there's a lot of components sitting inside of this, not only with the CCA, which everyone talked about standalone, but we've already had a conversation that we can offer that and then move towards this CCO. For Murupara, it may just give comfort knowing that Rotorua is just up the other end, not far from us in terms of that CCO, but also moving in with the DIA. If you use the term price harmonisation, if that's what it looks like, I agree with too, we just need to get that comms out there that is supportive of the decision, and once again in layman's term, nothing complicated. We're always getting feedback around lack of understanding what's going on, and that we just make decisions without their consultation because they don't understand the language. But no, let's move forward. And we'll just, whatever comes our way, we just need to just stand resolute in the decisions that's been made, because it is the right decision. It is.
Thank you. Right, that draws us to a close. We've got the direction that we needed, we were seeking. So we'll prepare the final modelling and do some extra work around the outliers and what are our levers or options to mitigate some of the impacts, and then come back.
I'll just chuck something in on top of that, Bevan. Bevan used the phrase if, when and how earlier in the presentation. And I think there's been direction today on if, and the team's got some really good direction. But, we've got 8 weeks to develop a water services plan based on council's decision tomorrow. And I suspect that will also, the when conversation, we'll have to discuss as part of that water services plan. So although this is talking about coming back to finance and report committee, actually I imagine that in our workshops to develop the water services plan, we're also going to have to integrate these conversations that you've had. And I think what's really valuable too is you've now got a lot of background about how complicated the water schemes and charging is in Whakatane, and also you're quite aware of some of those charging regime challenges that either the council or a ring-fenced entity or a multi-council CCO entity might have in the future. But we've still got a lot of uncertainty about which of those three options, which of those three things might be happening in the future. So yeah, we'll probably be coming back to it when we're talking also about the water services plan too.
Thank you, guys. 2.
Tēnei wā, o tirake nui tātou, kia tātou katoa e tātou whai o tātou ariki. Ahu ka reitsi me te arawa te atu me te whiwhinga tahitangi te warua tapu ake. Amen.